Welcome to Fluxedo Junction. I'm Scott Kuchler. Each episode, we bring you the best music of all genres from throughout the world, and this week we'll be speaking with legendary drummer Liberty Devitto. Widely known as the drummer for the Billy Joel Band from 1976 through 1993, Liberty has also played with many of the most influential musicians in the world, including Paul McCartney, Carly Simon, Stevie Nicks, Rick Wakeman, and Meat Loaf. He's most recently been active with two different bands, the Lords of 52nd Street, featuring other members of the classic-era Billy Joel Band, Richie, Cannata, and Russell Javers, and the Slim Kings, featuring bassist Andy Attanasio and vocalist guitarist Michael Sackler-Berner. We're going to start things off in a slightly more obscure place. Here's Liberty backing up legendary Liverpool singer Billy J. Kramer on a track called I Won the Fight, here on Fluxedo Junction. Okay, great. I guess I wanted to get started with the fact that I'm here on Long Island. I'm a Long Island musician, and while you and I have never met, we've been maybe a foot away from each other on at least 20 occasions. And I've loved your playing forever since before I even played music, and I just never wanted to bother you. But I think the last place I saw you was at Sam Ash. I used to work at Sam Ash in Huntington. And I think I ran into you there. But the reason I bring up Sam Ash is because that's where I met another friend of mine who you've actually played with, Billy J. Kramer. One of my favorite albums that you play on is I Won the Fight by Billy J. Kramer. And I was good friends with him and Ronnie, and it's so sad that Ronnie is gone. But I was hoping maybe we could start there. Do you mind speaking a little bit about your relationship with Billy and what it was like recording that album?
So me and Ricky were playing down at the cutting room, the old cutting room in Manhattan, and Billy and Ronnie came down, and we talked, and Billy said, yeah, he's looking for put a band together. And from the band that was playing that night, he took me and a fellow named Muddy Shoes, and the bass player, and we started this band. And Billy was great to work with. I mean, Billy is a first-class guy. You know, he takes care of the people around him. Ronnie was like that too. You know, and the songs that he wrote, you know, a lot came out of his recovery. Yeah. You know, I Won the Fight explains the whole thing, what it was like before, and what life is like now. So, you know, I'm in recovery too. Ricky Bird's in recovery. So many people are in recovery these days, and so we can relate. We can relate to each other. We're both foodies and everything like that. So it was a great relationship.
Well, I love your playing on it. I love his performance on it as well. I mean, it's just a great album, and it's so nice when somebody like that is able to sort of keep their sound updated. You know what I mean? And just keep going with it. I really always admired him for that. He's such a nice guy.
I had an experience with him that was my favorite, and I mentioned this to anybody. You remember that Beatle book came out? It was really thick. It was all about the Beatles by had a white cover on it. It started with the families coming over from Ireland. John's family.
Was it Shout, the Philip Norman book? Shout?
No. This was a really thick white book. Anyway, I'm on the plane with Billy. We're traveling, and he's on one side of the aisle and I'm on the other side of the aisle, and I'm reading, and I'm like fascinated. But I'm such a Beatle fan, like I want to know everything about them, and I'm fascinated at what I'm reading. And Billy taps the book and he goes, "Is it good?" And I said, "Oh, it's so good." And he taps the book again and he goes, "I was there." You bastard!
As long as we're trading Billy stories, I'll give one of my own, and then we'll jump into your music. Billy, there was a story that I had read about John Lennon that isn't like widely circulated, and it's a story about how he beat the crap out of Bob Wooler, the DJ from the Cavern Club, for alleging that he had a homosexual affair with Brian Epstein. And I don't care if he had a homosexual affair or not. It's just the story is fascinating. It was apparently Paul's 21st birthday party, and Wooler made some sort of comment, and apparently Lennon beat him within an inch of his life, And but I only ever read it in one account. I never ever heard it again. And I was always kind of curious about it. I wasn't even sure the account I read was a reliable one. It was the Albert Golden book, actually. So after of course, when you first meet Billy, or when I first meet Billy, I don't want to barrage him with questions about the Beatles. It was probably 6 months after I had already met him that I finally had the courage to ask, hey man, do you mind if I ask you a Beatles question? I was like, John Lennon and Bob Wooler, and he starts shaking his head. And he was like, yeah, I was there, Paul's birthday, right? And I was like, yeah, did that really happen? He was like, not only did it really happen, he was like, it took like 7 of us to pull Lennon off that guy. And Billy was a big dude. I mean, Billy worked on the railroad and everything. He was like, it took 7 of us to pull him off. And he was like, an Epstein hushed that up real quick. And then, I never thought about that story again until the Get Back documentary popped up on Disney Plus, and Lennon makes a comment about it in that movie, like a really quick passing comment. He's like, I don't regret anything, not even Bob Wooler. And I was like, oh, shit. That's cold, man. I wanted to...
Hanging around with Billy was like a Beatles dictionary,
Yeah. I'm glad that we're kind of talking about the Beatles a little bit, because while I've been a fan of yours since The Stranger, my favorite album that you ever played on was The Nylon Curtain. And I remember reading an interview with Billy about that album where they were commenting on, sort of the Beatles' influence on that record. And he said, I wish I could remember where the interview was, but he said, well, a lot of that's down to Liberty. He said, I love when Liberty does Ringo type stuff on the drums. And, you do so much more than that. I've seen the Drumeo video, where you're just laying it down. And, I've heard you play, I've heard your work with other artists before, but that Beatles influence on that album, it made me think of a handful of other drummers. I have such respect for Ringo as a drummer. I got to tour with him. I got to know him a little bit. I've seen him do things on the drums that I know are way more impressive than people realize he can do. But there's only a handful of drummers that I've met. You and I have never officially met, but yourself and also Dennis Dykin from the Smithereens, and one or two other guys who just really are able to do that Ringo thing when they need to. And I know that obviously the Beatles are an influence on you. You just mentioned it a little while ago. But could you speak a little bit to not just Ringo's influence on your playing, but some of the other drummers from that time period too, who are really underrated? Maybe Charlie Watts, maybe a couple of other guys. So I'm imagining maybe Motown is an influence in there too.
Yeah, well, of course, Ringo. When I was in school, I got to the 8th grade and I wanted to meet girls and stuff like that. And in the 6th grade, I tried to play drums. They said, put the sticks down, DeVito, you'll never do anything with the drums. And I hated sports. All the girls in my junior high school loved the guys that played sports. So it wasn't until the Beatles were on the Ed Sullivan Show and I watched them, and I was watching Ringo, and I said, that's what I want to do. I want to be in a band that travels the world with they're all friends. That my impression of watching them like that was that these guys are friends and they're getting to travel the world together and play great music, and they're getting every girl they want. So it was like, so he was my first teacher. I'm going to call them teachers because I never took lessons. I learned by watching people. So he was my first teacher. After that, I started to get into Dino Dinelli from the Rascals.
Oh yeah, he's great. Yeah,
he blew me away. I mean, he was the first one to show me that a drummer could get as much attention and visual as a lead singer can.
Sure.
Because you would watch him. Then of course Carmine Apiece,
Yeah.
But still going back to that English Invasion, what's his name from the Hollies? What a great drummer he was. Procol Harum, B.J. Wilson.
Yeah.
What a great drummer he was. I love that. Jim Capaldi, who played with Traffic.
I've seen Jim Capaldi play.
One of my
yeah.
favorites.
Wow. Well, can I ask you a question actually regarding the, because you mentioned Carmine, who I interviewed not that long ago, and there's a commonality there, I guess. There's a connection to Long Island. And this interview is going out worldwide, but I'm on Long Island. I'm a Long Island musician, and I'm 55. So by the time I started gigging and doing the club circuit around here, it was like the early to mid 80s, and I just missed out on like that golden era of live performance here on Long Island, you know. And because I wasn't even around for it, like I didn't even exist yet, I love talking to people about what the music scene was like here on Long Island in the late 60s into the early 70s. And I'm thinking specifically of places like the Action House. I remember seeing not too long ago a poster of a show from the Action House, which seemed impossible. I mean, the lineup of the show seemed impossible. It had, you know, Vanilla Fudge. It had The Pack, which was basically Grand Funk Railroad. It had the Jimi Hendrix Experience, King Crimson. Scott Muni was the MC. Andy Warhol's Exploding Plastic Inevitable. Like, all of these people on one night on one bill. And I know the Action House was not that big. But now I know that people like Hendrix and people like that legitimately played there. I think the impression I get is it was the place you went to on a night off from a run at the Fillmore to make some extra brown bag money to get yourself back home. But
it was an amazing place. Like you say, it wasn't that big, but it did have two stages.
Okay.
There was a big stage and a little stage. One of the first bands I ever saw there was Chicago, where they toured on their first album, and they were on the little stage.
Wow.
I saw Blue Cheer on the big stage. I saw Traffic on the big stage. Lee Michaels on the big stage. I mean, they had every act that came through the city came to the Action House too. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, just trying to wrap my head around that scene. Of course, that ballroom scene that kind of existed, I guess, in the late 60s, it doesn't really exist so much anymore. I mean, here in New York, you had the Fillmore East, you had the Fillmore West. In Detroit, you had the Grandee Ballroom. In Philly, you had the Electric Factory. And then you had underground FM radio sort of promoting everything. It was sort of like a pre-internet underground communication for people to find out what was happening in the counterculture. And
well, you talk about the Long Island. LIR was the one that they owned Long Island.
Yeah.
I mean, Dennis McNamara tells a great story of U2 being picked up at the airport, and they're driving in a car, and they're wondering why they're going away from the city. You know, they didn't realize that LIR was the one that was launching new talent.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing when you really look at the history. I mean, nobody ever talks about it, but the history that Long Island played in the history of music, the part that Long Island played in the history of music at that time, it's unspoken. There were so many great musicians coming from here. There was great radio. There were great writers. I guess our proximity to New York City is sort of what dampens the impact or the perceived impact of what happened here. But I'd love to move a little bit forward because in watching the Dromeo videos that you did, which, by the way, if anybody in the audience hasn't seen your interview on Dromeo, they should, because my wife and I just watched every clip that exists of you up on that website, and we were just blown away by your playing. I want to kind of get to how you developed your style of drumming to the point where you could work with somebody like Billy Joel, being a song drummer. Now, I know Ringo was a song drummer and lots of other people too, who would have been your influences. But did your sensibility to that exist even prior to that, like with Topper and with the other bands that you played with?
Yeah, with Topper was myself, Russell Travers, Doug Stegmeyer, and Howard Emerson, who became the Billy Joel band with the inclusion of Richie Cannata playing sax. But Russell was writing songs at the time. So this is before Billy. And we were working out these songs. We were all Beatles fans and Stones fans. And we were basically into the top 40. You know what I mean? Of what was going on and how to construct a song. So that's where we learned how to do that, and we just took that into Billy. You know, Billy had great songs, but his arrangements weren't great, and the parts that the band was playing, you know, because he used studio musicians on Piano Man and Street Life Serenada, and they're great tunes on there, but there's something lacking. And Billy was smart enough to say that he wanted a band that's recorded with him and went on a road with him. You know, it's the same band.
Yeah.
So learning how to create a song and listening to parts. You know, when I was learning how to play and I would put a record on and be playing to a Beatles song or something like that, I don't read music and I can't write music, so I would get lost in the song. The only way I knew how to navigate the song was to learn the lyrics. So I was singing along with it, and that's when I realized, hey, the drummer does a drum fill when the singer stops singing, you know? Or the drummer does a drum fill to take the band into a more exciting part, like the bridge or a chorus or something like that. He doesn't walk all over the singer, you know? So I started to listen, you know, of what these drummers are doing that is so great. You know, the hardest thing to teach is feel. You have to listen to guys that have great feel. Like a guy like Phil Rudd.
Oh, yeah.
AC/DC. What does he play? He really doesn't play much. But what he's playing is amazing.
Well, it's what you're saying is resonating with me a lot because, well, first of all, I have to say, watching that Drumeo video, I could see you singing along at different points while you're playing the songs. So it's clear that that's your North Star with you know what you're reacting to. But yeah, Phil Rudd is like the opposite of what every drummer I know. If you ask them who their top 5 drummers are, it would be predictable. John Bonham, Neil Peart, maybe Stuart Copeland if it's a really smart, maybe Mitch Mitchell if they really know their history. But nobody talks about Phil Rudd. Nobody talks about like the guys who are playing really in the pocket. But what's interesting to me is that
Simon Kirk, great.
Yeah,
with Bad Company.
But the interesting thing to me is that while we're watching that Drumeo video and we're watching you actually play your parts, I mean, these Billy Joel songs, these are songs I've been hearing my whole life. These are huge, huge songs that everybody knows. And while I always knew you were a great drummer, on some of those songs, I don't think I was cognizant of how aggressively you played on some of that stuff and still stayed out of the way. You know, like sometimes I'll say this. So I don't know what your opinion of him as a drummer is, but like one of my favorite drummers is Stuart Copeland. But I have to admit that sometimes I'll be watching him play with the Police, and I'm like, that's a little over the top, man. It's like I think I understand why Sting gets so pissed off at this guy sometimes, but I never get that feeling from you.
Did you see his Drumeo video?
Yes. He
says that. I'm going to play whenever I feel like it, Joe. I'm sorry if your vocals in the way. You know?
He's very funny, yeah.
His thing is hysterical, his Drumeo video. But I love Stuart Copeland. I compare him to Danny Seraphine in Chicago.
Yeah.
The way Danny Seraphine took rock and fused it with jazz, Stuart Copeland took rock and fused it with reggae.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love rock drummers that are jazz influenced. I mean, that's not all that I love, but guys like Mitch Mitchell, I really, really admire. And that leads me to my next question. Do you ever feel like, as a result of having played with Billy Joel for so many years, you're on all of these iconic songs, but did you ever feel like you wanted or deserved a little more of the spotlight than you got simply because you were playing in a band? It was an established band that was together for, decade and a half, 2 decades, but it was his name, Did that ever bother you? I don't mean financially. I just mean like in terms of, I guess, pure ego.
Well, before I answer that question, I will tell you that I saw Hendrix 4 times.
Wow.
And I saw Mitch Mitchell play, and he was really good. I saw Green, too. And Baker was great too.
I saw the Cream reunion show in London, so that was my only time I saw Ginger Baker.
These guys had their own style. That's what it was. It was like no two drummers really played alike back then in the '60s. You know, you take John Densmore from the Doors,
yeah,
and I'm just like recently listened to "Hello, I Love You, Won't You Tell Me Your Name?"
Yeah,
and there's a drum pattern he's playing in there. That comes around every time. It's "Hello, I Love You." You know, he's doing these fills like not Charlie Watts, Jimmy Miller.
Yeah,
when he played on what song is it that he plays on? You can't always get what you want.
Yeah,
there's the drum pattern, boom, da 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 boom, da da boom, da 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 boom. You know,
yeah,
it fits so well.
Now,
that's brilliant.
I'm glad you're bringing that up too, because just to touch on the Doors real quick, and this will relate to a question for you. I remember seeing, I guess, a documentary about the Doors where they interviewed the individual. You know, Ray Manzarek was still alive at that point, and they were talking about writing "Break On Through," and each musician is in their own location being interviewed by a different film crew talking about the song coming together, and each one of them talks about who they basically stole something from. So Ray Manzarek was talking about how he basically took the keyboard part, or the left hand of the keyboard part, from Ray Charles, you know what I say. And then I can't remember who Robbie Krieger said he stole his part from, but then John Densmore was talking about, forgive me, is it a bossa nova beat or a merengue beat that he's playing on that?
Bossa Nova.
Yeah, bossa nova. And so it's clear, while everybody has this impression that the Doors was Jim Morrison, it's clear that they all had an equal part in contributing to those tunes. I get the same impression about Billy Joel's music too with that particular band. Is that a correct perception? Were you guys involved in the arrangements? I mean, certainly he was a songwriter, but how involved were you guys in the arrangements?
Oh, let me tell you something. First of all, you know, Ringo also plays a bossa nova on Reply.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, Billy would come in the studio the first day. We go in the studio, and maybe he had 2 songs, maybe. But he had these ideas, and he would run them past the band. We would play along, and if the idea would fly because the band was playing it with different parts and making it more interesting, he would go home and finish the lyrics and all that kind of stuff like that. But we had a freedom from Phil Ramone to do whatever we wanted to do.
Wow. You
guys do whatever you want. And then we honed it down to like, this fits, that doesn't, this fits, that doesn't. So we all did the arrangements. Phil was asked once at a lecture he did, what made Billy Joel the phenomenon that he became? And Phil said he wrote great songs and his band came up with great arrangements. Mm-hmm. You know, so yes, we did have a big part of that.
Can I ask you this? I don't mean to put you on the spot with this question, but can you speak a little bit about each of the other members of the Billy Joel band at that time, and sort of, maybe impossible to do, but sort of in a sentence or two, tell us what you could rely on each of those guys for, and what made them special as musicians?
Well, Doug Stegmeyer, great bass player. The hardest job that Doug had to do was to stay out of Billy's left hand, stay away from it.
Right.
You know, because Billy was very busy with his left hand. So the bass player has to really think about what he's going to play, not to get in the way of that left hand. You know, I understand that when what's his name, got the keyboard player from Leonard Skinner.
Oh, yeah, Billy Powell. Yeah.
Billy Powell. He was a classical player.
Yeah.
They actually made him sit on his left hand to get it out of the way.
Oh, that's funny.
You know, so that's Doug. Russell Javers was he wrote great songs, Russell. It's unfortunate that Topper, the band that we had, we almost got a record deal, but at the last minute it was decided not to do it because we were Billy's band. Billy would lose his band if we got a record deal.
Right.
So, but Russell wrote great songs. So that's where we really honed how to develop songs. When we had Howard Emerson, he was a great guitar player. He could just play around anybody else. Not step on anybody's toes, just play around anyone else. We use studio guys in the studio. Steve Kahn, Hiram Bullock, Hugh McCracken.
Oh yeah, he's great.
Those guys played guitar on a lot of records. Richie Cannata was the cream on the top of the cake. He was the frosting. He, was there to play parts. They asked him when he did the solo to Still Rock and Roll to Me. They said, do a solo that in 20 years people will remember. Who knew it was going to be over 50 years that people are still remembering that solo?
It is an amazing solo, actually.
It was all great. We were all hungry. We loved Billy's songs because we all came from Long Island. I'm in Seaford. Billy's in Hicksville. It's almost like just up the block.
Yeah.
So we always had a point of reference. It's very important.
I want to. You've already given me more time than I expected, so thank you. I'm not going to keep you much longer. But what I would love to sort of touch base on is the Lords of 52nd Street, because you do have actually a couple of shows coming up. One of them is in Jersey. There are two other ones coming up in Florida. At this point in your career and in your life, as somebody, who's been at it for so long and has already accomplished so much, and who also, I'm sure has got a family that you like spending time with, how hard is it to leave home and go on the road these days? I mean, obviously the dates are more spread out than they would have been back in the day. It kind of reminds me of the way Paul McCartney does stuff. They'll do a week on and a week off or whatever, so everybody can sort of hang with their families. How is it playing live now? Do you still love it? Have you ever loved it, or would you prefer to play live or in the studio?
No. Well, my favorite thing is to play in the studio. I love recording. I love going on the road. I mean, where else can you get up in the morning and go downstairs to breakfast and then come back and your bed's made and you got fresh towels? That's not going to happen when I'm home. Be taking out the garbage, and I'm going to be, I have an 8-year-old that I have to take to school every day, and so my home life is great. I love it. I don't like being away for too long. I love making the music. I have another band called the Slim Kings that we're signed to a record label in Toronto. It's called Wax Records. It's under the Universal heading. And we have an album out. They do things so differently these days than they used to when I was with Billy. You release it on TikTok, and you get followers and all this kind of stuff. But we're killing it, We're really, really, really doing well. And they keep talking about, okay, maybe we should start doing gigs. That's when I get nervous. What kind of gigs are we going to do? Where are we going? What are we doing? As far as playing, when I play with the Lords of 52nd Street, physically, I'm not a kid anymore like I used to. So I can still do it. But when it used to be sex and drugs and rock and roll, now it's 4 Advil, a Snickers bar, and some ice
Oh my God! Oh, I was just about to wrap up and give the whole post speech and everything, but then I remember that I have one more question for you. Do you play to a click track? What's your feeling about the click track?
Live or in the studio?
Either one, I guess.
Okay, in the studio, sometimes I'll play to a click track. With Billy, we'll hardly play to a click track. I think you might be able to hear it on Running on Ice. There's a shaker in the background or something like that. But hardly ever. I remember the first times Phil used a click track I got nervous, and Steve Kahn said, "Don't be scared. The click track is your friend." But Phil used the click track because when you find that great tempo for the song, sometimes when you're playing the song, you start to speed it up because you get more energy and it gets more exciting, the song. And if it wasn't a take, Phil could always go back to the click to bring us back to the original tempo again. If you start playing fast, the next take you're going to start at that speed again.
I'm primarily a guitar player, but I do have a couple of drum students at the school that I teach at, just beginner drum students. And one of them has a talent show today, as a matter of fact, and he's doing Back in Black, AC/DC. He's playing along with the track. And so I've been working with him on it for the past couple of weeks. And I don't know, it doesn't sound to me like they played to a click track. I mean, certainly they're in sync with each other. And I love AC/DC. I went on the road with those guys. Amazing band. But it does feel like they speed up when they get to the chorus, and it's messing this kid up so bad. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. I don't think they used a click track, man. You just got to feel it. But it's so hard. I mean, if you're there.
Sing along with the song, and you sing with the singer, and you know where you're going.
That's good advice.
Sometimes when we record in the studio, if there's sometimes there's a click track, but the last one we did was in Richie Cannata's studio, Cove City, and it was with Doug, the second keyboard player with the Lords, and the way he recorded the music and then his vocal, the vocal was a little bit behind the click track. So I said, take the click track out, let me play to his vocal. Because you could hear when he takes a breath.
Right.
That it's going to be a little bit laid back a little,
Wow. Well, listen, you've already given me this has been such an honor for me. I was nervous all week about doing this interview. You're a hero of mine, and I know you're a hero to a lot of my other musical friends as well. Thank you so much, man. Thank you for the time you've given me. I'm so appreciative.
Well, it was great, man. Thank you.